Bob, and welcome back to the beach, where today I have a very special movie review for you guys. A movie I just watched, a movie that came out in 1997, a movie with god-awful special effects, and a movie that features a character or characters who appear in a Mortal Kombat game. But it's not the one you're thinking of. Today, I'm going to be talking about Spawn. So, Spawn came out in 1997 and was directed by Dippé, who largely worked in visual effects and still does, and we'll get to why that's important later. So this movie follows Al Simmons, who was the special agent assassin guy until his boss and the villain of this movie, played by Sheen, kills and betrays him. And after this, he comes back to life as this Hellspawn, this soldier of the dead, and he's meant to do whatever the devil's bidding is, or whatever this demon's bidding is. But instead, he rejects that, and this movie is about him becoming the superhero, becoming Spawn. So this movie was my first real introduction to the character of Spawn. I know he originated in Todd McFarlane's comics of the same name, and there was an animated series during the 90s which featured the same character, and he's popped up in different things ever since then. But this is really where I have most of my info from, is from this movie, which I just watched a couple weeks ago. So going forward, I'm going to be reviewing this movie as a movie itself. I don't know very much about the original comics ideas or what exactly Spawn is supposed to be, but I'm going to review this movie just as if it is a movie that I know is based on comic books. So I think the best place to start is with the story. So everything I just said in that little synopsis I just gave, that stuff is all very strong, and that stuff is mostly pulled directly from the comics. But the main plot of this movie, which I don't know if it's based on something from the comics or not, the main plot of this movie is heavily flawed, and that's mostly thanks to some really, really poor characters. Almost every character in this movie does the same, gruff voice, especially if they're a villain, and every character is so one-dimensional and so one-sided. And especially, like I mentioned, Sheen is in this movie. Sheen, as in Apocalypse Now, is in this movie as the villain, and I think he's the worst offender, because he just speaks every line with this gruff, chalky voice, and you just have to think, he must have gone home after shooting and just, not even been able to talk. It's just such a caricatured voice, and it really fits so well with this character, who is such a caricature. This character is villain. That's it. This character is the villain of the movie. That's all there is to it. Just imagine the most 90s villain you can, and then strip them of any possible humanity they could have had. That's the villain in this movie. But he has this lady who's his sidekick too. She's also the same case, although she doesn't even talk that much. But almost every character in this movie really is just a caricature. But there are some exceptions. Michael Jai White, who plays Spawn, who plays Al Simmons, he is pretty good, and obviously he had to go through a lot of makeup and a huge process to get this whole suit on for what he did in this movie, and the performance does come through pretty well through the prosthetics and such. But the real highlight here is John Leguizamo. Oh my god. This is my favorite part of this movie, and this might be my favorite part that John Leguizamo has ever played, even beating out Sid. So in this movie, John Leguizamo plays the character of the Violator, who is this demon clown thing from hell. And John Leguizamo hams it up in this role, and I had no idea he was in this movie until I turned it on, and I am so glad he is, because his character and the way this portrayal works out is the only reason I could have made it through this movie. It's so good. It's so hilarious. It's in that vein of so good it's bad, and we'll talk about that a bit later too. But it's just John Leguizamo doing exactly what he is best at. I don't know where this casting came from. Someone at New Line must have seen Romeo and Juliet and been like, that's the guy. He's gonna play this fat demon clown. But oh my god, it works so perfectly. And I think it's my favorite performance from Leguizamo. And off the coattails of that, the costuming is very good in this movie. The costuming for both Leguizamo's Violator and for Spawn himself, the costumes and prosthetics for that do look very good. But unfortunately, there is a major over-reliance on CGI in this movie. And it's an over-reliance that seems to step a little bit too far for the era when this came out. So like I said, this is directed by Mark Dippé, who works largely in VFX. And so the shots that do have visual effects, which are a lot of the shots in this movie, I will say, do mesh well with visual effects. Like, everything is directed and set up perfectly for visual effects to be implemented very well. And you can tell that, especially in some of the shots during a fight scene with the Violator later in the movie. But I think Dippé got a little bit overambitious with what he was trying to achieve here, because you can tell he wanted to do a lot with the visual effects and the CGI in this movie. But unfortunately in 1997, and this is the case with Mortal Kombat Annihilation as well, special effects were just not at a point where this could have worked. And unfortunately, it makes this movie a little bit hard to watch, especially because it is so reliant on these special effects, which don't look all that great, especially going back. But I don't think even these special effects, I think if I saw this film in theaters in 1997, which I wasn't alive then, but if I had, I still don't think these special effects would have blown me away. Like, compare this to Jurassic Park, which had come out already at that point. And I know that is a high bar, but I think it definitely overreached with the CGI. And a bit of a smaller complaint I have with the VFX is they put the cape on Spawn in post. And this is a bit of a nitpick. Spawn's cape is fully computer generated. Anytime his cape is on screen, it is fully CGI. And so, as a result, the cape isn't featured very much in this movie. But if you look at the marketing, if you look at the posters, if you look at how Spawn is supposed to look, if you look at stills from the animated series, if you look at panels from the comics, Spawn has a cape. And so it makes it feel like he's naked almost when he's walking around with no cape in this movie. And so I just don't understand really why they didn't go with some kind of practical cape, or why they made this cape fully CGI. But it does look really cool when it is there, so I will give it that. But looping back around to the story for a second, this movie also suffers from something that a lot of films with indestructible or immortal-esque characters suffer from, and that is that the deaths are not always exactly deaths in a conventional sense. And so getting into the ending especially, and I won't give spoilers even for a 25-year-old movie, getting into the ending, it becomes this kind of like two characters who are effectively immortal, fighting each other, killing each other again. Death is a fake out, then they come back, and it's like, where does this stop? Like, this goes forever. Overall, this movie is not great. It's not a total disaster, but it's close. And even by 1997 standards, I don't think this is the best movie. And it does really feel like that late 90s, early 2000s movie where they're still trying to figure out how far visual effects can go realistically, but then you've still got some great practical effects going on. And so if I give it one thing, it definitely has a great late 90s movie tone to it. It is very reminiscent of those original Mortal Kombat movies or anything else of that similar caliber from that era. It's definitely in a very strange transitionary period for the superhero genre. But this film also belongs to another genre, my favorite genre, of movies that are so bad that they're just hilarious. And so that's where I see most of the value in this movie. I really do enjoy this movie as a so bad it's good film. And there are some hilarious parts, especially I would rewatch this just to see this John Leguizamo hamming it up again, because it is really good. And I mean, obviously some of the stuff I brought up about the villains and the caricature characters is quite laughable. And I think if you go into this movie not expecting to be blown away, but expecting that kind of fun time that you would get with something like Mortal Kombat Annihilation or something on that similar caliber, I think you are going to have fun with this. And so Overall, I'm going to give Spawn 1997 a 4 out of 10. Yes, it was technically a pretty bad movie, but I don't know. I had fun with it. It was definitely, it really felt like 1997, and watching this movie feels like stepping back into a different time in filmmaking, especially before the superhero genre had figured out what was going on, and before visual effects had figured out what was going on, and when John Leguizamo was flourishing. But he always is, isn't he? Anyways, I've been Max. This has been Maxify Film Review on the beach, and I'll see you in the next one.